They called it hubris. My sister called it a midlife crisis made of timber and ambition. The city planning board called it a permitted residential anomaly. I called it the canopy. 3 months before the world ended, I finished building a 3-story, solar-powered, rainwater-filtered luxury treehouse in a 2-acre private 1 hour north of the city. As an architect specializing in sustainable builds, it was my masterpiece, my retreat from client meetings and compromise. It was also, though I didn't know it yet, the thing that would save my life. The outbreak news felt distant, a scrolling horror on my phone as I sipped coffee on the western deck, 60 feet above the forest floor. Metropolitan quarantine. Avoid travel. I had groceries for a month, a satellite internet link, and a sense of detached unease. The collapse, when it came, was a silent one for me. The internet stuttered and died. The radio stations bled into emergency tones, then static. The last text from my sister in the city was a single word: coming. She never arrived. For the first week, I lived in a bubble of surreal peace. I watched the contrails fade from the sky. I listened to the wind in the white pines that held my home. Then the sounds began. Distant gunshots, like scattered firecrackers, from the direction of the state highway. The occasional scream, swallowed by the trees. And one morning, I saw a movement on the old logging road that bordered my property. Not a deer, a person. Shambling, erratic, clothes torn. It walked into a tree, bounced off, and kept going, unaware. The first confirmation. They were here. The world below the canopy was infected. My hubris had a purpose. The canopy was designed for resilience, not just aesthetics. The core support came from 4 mature, healthy white pines, with custom-designed titanium brackets that allowed for tree growth and movement. The access was a bridle, a series of 3 rope and wood bridges that connected to smaller platforms in neighboring trees, culminating in a final retractable rope ladder to the forest floor. Pull up the ladder, and you are on an island in the sky. The first rule was established. The ladder comes up at dusk, no exceptions. I began my survival not as a warrior, but as a systems manager. My luxury became my lifeline. The 12-panel solar array on the roof kept the battery bank humming, powering the LED lights, the small fridge, the water pump. The complex gutter system funneled rainwater through sand and charcoal filters into a 500-gallon storage tank in the subfloor. I had a composting toilet. I was, for all intents, a closed loop, but a loop needs input. My month of gourmet groceries, artisanal cheeses, organic produce, vacuum-sealed steaks would not last. The forest was my new pantry and my new threat. I had to go down. My first foray was to the small tool shed at the property's edge, 100 yards from the main trunk. I went at midday, armed with a climbing axe and a racing heartbeat. The forest was too quiet. No birds. I reached the shed, my eyes scanning every shadow. Inside, I grabbed what mattered: a heavy forestry axe, a bow saw, a roll of paracord, a manual drill. Tools for living, not fighting. As I turned to leave, I saw it. A shambler, a woman in a ruined nurse's scrubs, stood between 2 birches, staring at the shed with blank, milky eyes. She hadn't seen me yet. Her head turned slowly, scanning. I froze, my back against the rough wood. After an eternity, she shambled away, drawn by some invisible cue. I ran back to the tree, my pack of tools clanking, and scurried up the ladder like a squirrel, hauling it up after me. I sat on the deck, trembling, not from the encounter, but from the realization. My paradise had just become a watchtower overlooking a kingdom of the dead. The blueprint for survival was no longer about comfort. It was about enduring the quiet, the fear, and the slow, ticking clock of solitude. I was the king of a tree, and my reign had just begun. I marked the days on a cedar beam with a knife, a prisoner counting cells. The seasons became my only calendar. Summer thickened the green veil around me, a beautiful, suffocating curtain. My kingdom was silent. The groans from below were rare, distant. The real enemy was the silence in my own head. I refined my systems. I built a pulley lift, a simple rope and bucket. To haul up firewood from deadfalls I could reach from the secondary platforms, so I wouldn't have to descend for fuel. I expanded my rainwater collection with tarps. I started a small, sad garden in planters on the sunny south deck. Fast-growing lettuce, radishes, beans. It was a symbolic gesture. It would never feed me, but tending it gave the days a rhythm. My greatest battle was against the weather. A summer thunderstorm was a terrifying symphony. The trees swayed, a great oceanic motion that made my stomach lurch. The wind screamed through the cables and platforms. I would huddle in the central core, the most structurally sound point, listening to the creaks and groans, praying my engineering would hold. It always did. The morning after brought a world washed clean and dripping in profound, lonely peace. I learned the patterns of the dead. They stayed on the paths in the old road. They didn't look up. Their world was a flat plain. To them, I was invisible, a scent or a sound too high to register. I named the regulars. Plaid shirt, an older man who did a daily, pointless shuffle up and down a logging road. Runner. Not fast, but dressed in decaying athletic wear, who never stopped moving. My humanity frayed at the edges. I talked to the trees. I narrated my chores like a documentary host. And here we see the solitary hominid performing the vital task of cleaning the sediment filter. I reread the same 10 books. I started a journal, but the entries became repetitive. Clear, no contact, 8 beans, filter cleaned. The first true crisis came in late summer. A wildfire started to the west, a hazy smear of brown smoke on the horizon. The wind was wrong. It wouldn't reach me, but the panic was electric. If fire came, my treehouse was a tinderbox coffin. I spent a frantic day preparing a bug-out bag and identifying a distant rocky outcrop as a potential refuge. The fire burned itself out against a river 10 miles away, but the lesson was seared into me. My sanctuary was fragile. Its safety was an illusion maintained by 1,000 quiet variables. The incident broke the dam of my passivity. I couldn't just be a caretaker. I needed to be a warden. I needed to see farther. Using the manual drill, spare lumber, and every ounce of my paracord, I began constructing a crow's nest. A small, shielded platform 20 feet above my already high roof, reachable by a knotted rope. It took 2 weeks. When I finally pulled myself up, the view stole my breath. I could see for miles over the rolling forest canopy, to the distant scar of the highway, to the hills beyond. I could see smoke from unknown sources. I could see movement on roads I didn't know existed. I was no longer just hiding. I was observing. The Silent Kingdom had a watchtower, and from that tower on a crisp autumn morning, I saw the thing that would change everything. A thin, steady column of smoke, rising not from a wildfire, but from a controlled chimney, 5 miles to the northeast. Someone else was alive. Someone was out there, lighting a fire, bold as you please. The silence in my head was replaced by a roaring conflict. Hope was a dangerous infection. To hope was to want. To want was to risk. I watched that smoke plume every day. A tiny thread connected me to another human being. My kingdom was no longer silent. It was waiting. And I, its lonely king, had to decide if I would send a signal back into the world or continue to hide in the leaves forever. The smoke was a siren song. For a week, I did nothing but watch it through my binoculars from the crow's nest. It appeared mid-morning, died by afternoon. A cooking fire. A disciplined person. The geography suggested it was in the valley near the old Miller farm. A defensible position with a water source. My mind warred with itself. The architect in me, the planner, saw only risk. Contact meant exposure. It meant giving away my position, my resources, my existence. The human being, starved of a voice that wasn't his own, saw a lifeline, a chance to share the crushing weight of this silent eternity. I decided on a compromise. I would make contact, but on my terms. I would be a ghost, an observer who leaves a gift. If they were hostile, I'd lose nothing but some supplies. If they were not, a dialogue could begin. I chose my offering carefully. Things I could spare that spoke of goodwill, not wealth. A half-pound my precious salt, poured into a sealed plastic bag. A dozen fish hooks in line for my camping gear. A small bottle of honey from a stash I'd found in the shed. Not food they could eat immediately, but tools for sustainability. A message: I want you to live, not just feed you. The journey would be the most dangerous thing I'd ever attempted. 5 miles of unknown forest. I spent days planning a route using my topographic maps, sticking to high ground and thick cover. I would go at dawn, travel slow and silent, and be back by dusk. No exceptions. The morning I left, the forest was frosted with the first chill of fall. I wore muted greens and browns, my face smudged with charcoal. My pack held the offering, water, a knife, and my axe. The descent of the ladder felt like stepping off a cliff. The forest floor was a foreign, threatening landscape. I moved like a ghost, placing each foot with deliberate care. Every rustle was a potential threat. I saw 3 shamblers, all at a distance, moving with the aimless patience of grazing cattle. I gave them a wide berth. The miles passed in a tense, hyper-focused haze. My senses were dialed to 11. The smell of damp earth, the sound of a jay's warning call, the feel of the cold air in my lungs. I found the source of the smoke by mid-morning. It was a Miller farm, or what was left of it. The farmhouse was a burned shell, but the old, sturdy stone spring house was intact. The smoke came from a cleverly diverted stovepipe, poking out of its roof. The place was fortified. Fallen logs formed a rough wall around a small yard. I watched from a ridge for an hour. No movement. This was the moment. Creep down, leave the package in an obvious spot, and retreat. But as I watched, the spring house door opened. A figure emerged. A woman. She was small, bundled in practical clothes, her dark hair tied back. She carried an axe and a bucket. She walked with the weary confidence of someone performing a familiar, dangerous chore. She went to the spring, filled her bucket, scanned the tree line with sharp, anxious eyes, and hurried back inside. Seeing her made it real. She wasn't a concept. She was a person, alive, tired, scared, just like me. I changed my plan. I wouldn't leave the package at the fortification. Too risky for her. I would leave it halfway between her spring and the tree line, on a prominent moss-covered rock, a place she'd see from her door. I circled down, my heart hammering. I reached the rock. I placed the bagged items on it. Then, on an impulse, I took my knife and carved a single, clear symbol into the moss on the rock's face, an upward-pointing arrow, a triangle, a mountain, a tree, a simple sign of here. I retreated back into the woods and climbed a tall oak to watch. An hour passed. The door opened again. She came out for more water. Her eyes swept the clearing, passed over the rock, then snapped back. She froze. She saw the package. She didn't run to it. She dropped into a crouch, axe ready, her head swiveling to scan every shadow. She was smart, cautious. After 5 minutes of absolute stillness, she approached the rock, stepped slow and ready to flee. She picked up the bag, examined the contents. She looked at the carved symbol. She looked directly into the forest, right toward my hiding spot. She couldn't possibly see me, but she raised a hand, palm open, and gave a single, slow nod. Then she took the offering and disappeared inside. I made the long trek home as the sun dipped low, exhaustion and elation warring in my veins. I had done it. I had reached out, and I had been seen, acknowledged. That night in my treehouse, I felt a new kind of fear, not of the dead, but of hope. I had thrown a stone into the still pond of my isolation. I had no idea what the ripples would bring, or what might be stirred from the depths. The offering had been given. Now I had to wait for the reply. Her reply came not with smoke, but with silence. For 3 days, the chimney at the spring house stayed cold. I watched, my anxiety curdling. Had I scared her away? Had the gift been misinterpreted? On the 4th morning, smoke rose again, and on the mossy rock, a reply appeared. I saw it through my binoculars, a white cloth tied in an elaborate, purposeful knot, and beside it a small, dark object. I had to know. The next day, I made the grueling journey back. On the rock was a perfect braid of wild onion bulbs, freshly dug, and the white cloth. The knot, upon inspection, was a masterpiece, a series of loops and hitches I couldn't decipher. A language. The onions were food, a reciprocal gift. The cloth was a message. I took them and left my second offering, a flint and steel fire starter, a tool for survival, another step in trust. This began the slow, silent trade. Every week or so, I'd make the trek. Her knots evolved. A complex knot one time meant danger nearby. A simple overhand knot meant all clear. She left gifts, dried mushrooms, a rabbit pelt, once a beautifully carved wooden spoon. I left practical items. Nails, a small saw blade, a roll of fishing line. We became pen pals and objects and knots. Two ghosts in the woods. I named her the knot maker. Our communication was a highlight of my existence, a thread of purpose in the gray monotony of survival. Then winter fell in earnest. The first blizzard transformed my world. The canopy became a skeletal lattice of ice and snow. The wind was a knife. My treehouse, designed for airflow, became a wind tunnel. The temperature inside dropped below freezing. My water lines froze. My solar panels were buried under feet of snow, their output trickling to nothing. The luxury treehouse became a frozen cage. I was plunged into a desperate, shivering struggle for basic warmth. I spent days chipping ice, clearing panels, and hauling snow up the pulley to melt on my tiny wood stove for water. My calorie burn tripled. I rationed my food, my breath foggy in the air as I ate cold beans. The worst was the isolation. The storms made travel to the knot maker impossible for weeks. I was truly alone, fighting a war against cold. I talked to myself constantly, my voice growing thin and reedy. I had dreams of warm rooms and crowded spaces that left me aching with loneliness upon waking. During a brief thaw, I risked a journey to our rock. I was gaunt, my clothes hanging loose. I left a jar of precious rendered fat from a squirrel I'd snared. Her return gift, days later when I could check, was a revelation. A pair of hand-stitched rabbit fur mittens, impossibly warm. She had seen my need in the emptiness of the trade and answered it. I held them to my face, smelling the wood smoke and pine that clung to them, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. Winter also changed the dead. They froze. I'd see them standing like grotesque statues in the clearings, immobilized by the cold. But they didn't die. They just paused, a temporary reprieve that felt eerie and wrong. The true test came in late January. A brutal ice storm coated every branch, every cable, every platform in a thick, glassy shell. The weight was immense. In the night, I was jolted awake by a deafening crack. I rushed to the east-facing deck. One of my secondary support cables, coated in 3 inches of ice, had snapped. The entire structure groaned, tilting perceptibly. My heart stopped. If another cable went, a whole section could peel away, sending me and my home crashing to the forest floor. There was no choice. I had to go out into the storm, onto the ice-sheathed platforms, and secure it. It was suicidal. I tied a rope around my waist, anchoring it to the main central beam, a makeshift safety line. I inched out onto the deck. The ice was like a skating rink. The wind threatened to pluck me off. 60 feet below, the ground was a hard, white death. With numb hands, I managed to loop a spare length of synthetic rope around the broken cable's anchor point and a healthy branch, cinching it with a tight trucker's hitch. The temporary fix held the strain. I crawled back inside, my body trembling violently from cold and adrenaline. I had saved the canopy. But the incident broke something in my confidence. My sanctuary was vulnerable. It required constant, dangerous maintenance. It was not a fortress, but a delicate machine suspended in the air at the mercy of the elements. As the deepest cold of winter finally began to loosen its grip, I was a changed man. Thinner, harder, quieter. The luxury was gone, burned away by the cold. What remained was a stark, simple will to persist, and the knowledge that 5 miles away, another person was also persisting. Our silent trade had gotten us through the gauntlet. Spring was coming, and with it, I knew our ghostly dance in the woods would have to change. We couldn't survive another winter as 2 distant satellites. We would have to choose, come together, or drift apart forever. The thaw was a noisy, messy rebirth. Dripping water replaced a howling wind. The frozen shamblers shook off their icy shells and resumed their shuffling patrols. The path to the Miller Spring house became a muddy slog, but it was passable. Our trade resumed, but the gifts felt different, heavier, more pointed. She left a whetstone. I left a spool of copper wire. She left a clay pot, hand-formed and fired. I left a small mirror. We were building a vocabulary of necessity, inching towards something more. The catalyst was a bear, not a shambler, a real, hungry black bear, emerging from its den. I saw it from the crow's nest, a dark shape moving with purpose through the new undergrowth. It was heading east, toward the valley, toward her. It was one thing to trade trinkets with a ghost. It was another to let that ghost be killed by a bear when I could warn her. I had no way to signal quickly. Smoke would take too long and attract everything. I had to go. Now, I ran the 5 miles, fear for her overriding my own caution. I arrived at the ridge overlooking the spring house breathless. The bear was at the edge of the clearing, sniffing the air, lumbering toward the stone building. She was outside, chopping wood, her back to the woods. There was no time for stealth. I did the only thing I could think of. I raised my rifle, a .22 I'd found in the shed, kept for absolute emergencies, and fired a shot into the air. The crack was obscenely loud. The bear started, rose on its hind legs, and turned toward the sound. She spun around, axe raised, saw the bear, then looked up at the ridge where I stood, fully exposed. The bear, confused by the noise and now seeing 2 humans, dropped to all fours and crashed back into the forest, away from us. Silence rushed back in, ringing. We stood frozen, staring at each other across 200 yards of clearing. I could see the shock on her face. Then, slowly, she lowered her axe. She didn't run. She didn't wave. She just looked at me. The hidden dance was over. We were seen. I retreated back into the trees, my pulse hammering. I had broken every rule. I had used a gun. I had revealed myself. I waited in my oak, expecting her to flee, to hide, to never come out again. An hour later, the spring house door opened. She walked to the mossy rock. She didn't leave a gift. She left a sign, propped against the stone, a large, flat piece of bark. On it, she had drawn with charcoal. Not a knot, a word. Thank you. It was crude, blocky letters. The first word. It hit me with a physical force. I slid down the tree and approached the clearing, no longer hiding. She watched from her doorway. I stopped at the rock, picked up the bark. I looked at her, raised my hand in a wave. She waved back. The next day, I returned. I brought a larger slate I prepared. On it, I chalked, "You okay? Bear gone?" I left it and retreated. The next day, her reply was there. "Yes. Thank you. Name is Maya." Maya. The ghost had a name. I took the slate, wiped it, and wrote, "I am Leo, live in trees. Will you talk?" Her reply a day later changed everything. "Yes. Come to rock at noon. No hiding. A meeting. A real face-to-face meeting." The risk was incalculable. It could be a trap. It could be the end of everything. But the winter had taught me that solitude could also be a trap, a slower, colder death. At noon the next day, I stood by the mossy rock, my axe at my side, my heart in my throat. The spring house door opened. Maya stepped out. She wore the rabbit fur mittens I'd given her. She had a knife on her belt. She walked toward me, stopping 10 feet away. We were 2 wild animals, sizing each other up. She was younger than I'd guessed, maybe late 20s, with sharp, intelligent face and eyes that held the same deep weariness I saw in my mirror. "Lil," she said. Her voice was rough from disuse, but clear. "Maya, the treehouse. I've seen it. Through binoculars. A flash of light off glass. I thought it was a myth. It's real." A long, awkward silence. The forest breathed around us. "The bear. Thank you," she said again. "You're welcome." We talked for an hour, standing there in the clearing, our words stumbling at first, then flowing. She was a botanist, had been doing field research when it happened. The spring house was her PhD project site. She knew the plants, the foraging. I knew the building, the mechanics. Our skills were perfectly complementary. We were two halves of a survival guide. We agreed on rules. We would meet weekly. We would share specific, heavy resources only in person. I could bring salt tools. She could bring medicinal herbs, preserved meat. We would establish signals for danger. We were not merging our lives. We were forming an alliance, a pact between two sovereign states. Walking home that day, the forest felt different. It was no longer just my kingdom or my prison. It was a shared territory. The silence had been broken not by a gunshot, but by a name. Maya. The first word had been spoken, and with it, the story of my survival shifted from a solo struggle to a fragile, terrifying, and exhilarating partnership. Spring deepened into a lush, green partnership. Our weekly meetings became the anchor of my existence. We stopped using the slate. Our voices relearning the rhythm of conversation. We traded more than goods. We traded knowledge. Maya taught me which spring greens were edible, which roots could be boiled into flour, which bark made a tea for pain. She showed me how to set snares that didn't mangle the meat. In return, I showed her how to reinforce her spring house door, how to build a proper rain catchment, how to basic principles of solar power. I brought her a small panel and a battery from my stash. We were a symbiosis. My treehouse provided a vantage point and security she lacked. Her knowledge of the land provided food and medicine I couldn't get. We began to plan small projects. I helped her build a raised, hidden garden inside her log wall. She helped me identify and cultivate a patch of high-protein amaranth and quinoa near my base tree. A risky but valuable ground-level project we tended together, armed and watchful. The alliance made us stronger, but it also doubled our anxiety. Worrying about my own safety had been a heavy burden. Worrying for two was exponentially worse. Every day I didn't see her smoke, a knot of fear tightened in my stomach. During our meetings, we developed a joint map detailing shambler patterns, water sources, and potential hazards. One day, she arrived at the rock with a grim expression. "I found tracks," she said. "Not shambler, not animal. Boot prints. 2 sets. Coming from the North Road, circling my place. They didn't cross the wall, but they looked. Raiders, or other survivors. The word hung between us. Other people were the ultimate variable. They could be allies, or they could be the end of everything we'd built. We need a fallback, I said. A place to go if we're overrun. Your trees, she said immediately. It's the most defensible. I had thought of this. Feared it. Bringing someone to the canopy was the final frontier of trust. It was my innermost sanctuary. But she was right. Okay, I said, the word feeling momentous. Next week. I'll show you. We'll make a plan. The day she came to the canopy was one of the strangest of my life. Seeing another human being standing on my deck, looking out from my crow's nest, was profoundly disorienting. She moved through the space with a botanist's quiet awe, touching the wood, examining the pulley system, the water filters. You built all this? Before? She asked, incredulous. Yeah. Seems stupid now, doesn't it? No, she said, looking at me with new respect. It seems like prophecy. We developed protocols. A specific series of whistle calls from the ground would mean emergency, come down, or danger, stay up. We identified a secondary, hidden platform lower in an oak tree, where she could potentially hold out if she couldn't reach the main ladder. I gave her a key to the combination lock on my ground-level gear cache. The boot prints did not return, but the threat had done its work. It had fused our alliance into something more like a unit. We were watching each other's backs. The weight, while heavier, was somehow easier to carry when distributed. The true test of our symbiosis came in high summer. Maya fell ill, a fever that left her shivering in the heat. She managed to signal me with a prearranged flag on her wall, a red cloth. I found her delirious on her pallet. She'd been bitten by a tick, she mumbled. Infection. I had basic antibiotics in my first aid kit, a precious, finite resource. I didn't hesitate. I dosed her, set up a camp in her spring house, and nurse her for 3 days. I fetched water, cooled her brow, and stood guard. I was terrified of losing her, of being in this vulnerable stone box on the ground, of the shamblers whose moans seemed to circle closer at night. On the 4th day, her fever broke. She was weak but lucid. "You stayed," she croaked. "Where else would I go?" I said and meant it while she recovered. I fortified her place further, adding a second hidden latch to the door. We didn't speak much about it. The debt was not recorded. It was just what we did. When she was well enough to travel, we went back to the canopy together. We sat on the deck as the sun set, sharing a can of peaches from my deepest stash, a celebration. The silence between us was no longer empty or awkward. It was comfortable. The silence of two people who no longer needed to fill the space with words because the understanding was already there. We were no longer just two survivors in proximity. We were a crew. The symbiosis was complete. We had shared our knowledge, our resources, our vulnerabilities, and our sanctuary. The treehouse was no longer just my retreat. It was our fortress. And the forest below was no longer just a kingdom of the dead. It was our territory, which we defended together. We had built something more valuable than safety. We had built trust. And as the first summer stars appeared above the canopy, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it not as a king and a ghost, but as partners. Our partnership moved with the seasons. Late summer was the time of the harvest, and for the first time, we had one. Maya's hidden garden yielded potatoes, beans, and squash. My elevated planters produced a modest but steady supply of greens. We foraged together, filling baskets with berries, nuts, and edible mushrooms she identified with absolute confidence. We smoked fish from the creek and dried venison from a deer she expertly took with her bow. For the first time since the world ended, we were not just scavenging or rationing. We were producing. We stored the bounty in my cool, dry subfloor storage and in her spring house root cellar. We were preparing for winter not with dread, but with a sense of proud accomplishment. We had turned our survival into a sustainable, small-scale life. The canopy and the spring house were the twin poles of a functioning, hidden ecosystem. This fragile prosperity made us bold, and boldness breeds risk. We decided to expand our territory slightly, to an abandoned apple orchard mile to the west, just visible from my crow's nest. The trees were old and gnarled, but they promised a windfall of fruit for drying and cider. It was a two-person job, one to pick, one to watch. We went on a clear, windy day. The orchard was eerily quiet, the grass tall between the rows. The apples were small and wormy, but they were food. We worked quickly, filling our sacks. Maya was in a tree, reaching for a high cluster when she froze. "Leo," she hissed, her voice low and urgent. "Don't move." I looked. At the far edge of the orchard, near the collapsed ruin of a farmhouse, 3 figures stood. They weren't shambling. They were still, and they were looking right at us. They wore dark, practical clothing and carried what looked like rifles. Raiders. The boot prints made flesh. One of them raised a hand, not in greeting, but in a halt gesture. Then he pointed at us, and they began to move, spreading out in a tactical formation. They were hunters, and we were the prey. Back to the trees, I whispered. Our planned escape route was a dense pine thicket to the south. "They'll cut us off," Maya said, already dropping from the apple tree. The creek bed. "Now!" We abandoned our sacks and ran, crashing through the tall grass toward the steep bank creek 50 yards away. A shout went up behind us, then a gunshot, cracking over our heads. A warning, or a bad shot. We tumbled down the bank into the shallow, rocky creek. The water was only ankle deep, but the banks gave us cover. We ran hunched over, the sound of our splashing masked by the gurgle of the water. "They're flanking." Maya gasped, glancing back. One of them was running parallel, on the high bank. We had one advantage. We knew this land. Maya led us into a tributary that was little more a muddy tunnel under thick willows. We crawled in, pressing ourselves into the cool mud, trying to control our ragged breath. Heavy footsteps thudded on the bank above. "Lost him in the creek," a man's voice growled. "Check downstream." We lay there for an hour, until the sounds of pursuit faded. We were covered in mud, our hearts hammering, the sweet smell of crushed apples from our clothes now sickeningly incongruous. We took a tortuous, hidden route back, not toward either of our homes, but to a halfway point, a camouflage lean-to I'd built as an emergency cache. We spent the night there, cold and silent, taking turns on watch, jumping at every night sound. At dawn, from a hidden vantage, we scoped our homes with binoculars. The canopy looked undisturbed. The spring house, from a distance, seemed quiet, but we couldn't be sure. Were they waiting? Had they found our places? We were like hornets who'd had their nest poked. We had been complacent in our little kingdom. Now we were hunted. We can't go back directly, Maya said, her face set in grim lines. Not for a day or two. We lead them there, it's over. We spent 3 days living like animals, moving between hidden spots, observing. We saw no sign of the raiders near our homes. They had either given up or were waiting with immense patience. On the 4th day, we risked it. We approached the spring house from a ridgeline, watching for an entire afternoon. Nothing. Under cover of darkness, Maya slipped in. It was untouched. I made my way to the canopy. It was also secure. The raiders had not found our cores, but they had found us. They knew we were here. 2 people, relatively well-equipped, in this sector of woods. We were on their map. The harvest was over. A new season had begun, the season of threat. Our Symbiosis was now a fortress under siege. We had to assume they would be back, looking for the source of the supplies we'd been harvesting. We convened a war council in the canopy. We doubled our security. We created false trails and misleading caches away from our homes. We established a dead drop system for communication, so we wouldn't have to meet regularly. We practiced rapid ascent drills with a treehouse ladder. The Hornets were in their nest, stings ready. We had worked so hard to build a life. Now, we had to be prepared to defend it with a violence we had thus far reserved only for the dead. The luxury of the treehouse was gone. What remained was its strategic value, a defensible high ground. And for the first time, I was deeply, painfully grateful not to be up here alone. As I looked at Maya, sharpening her knife by the light of a shielded candle, I knew our partnership had just entered its hardest chapter. We had grown food. Now we would have to grow thorns. Autumn painted the forest in fire, but we saw only camouflage and threat. The raiders became our constant shadow. We found more signs. A snipped wire fence, a footprint by our creek, the lingering smell of tobacco smoke on the wind. They were patient, probing. We never saw more than 3 at a time. Scouts. Our lives contracted to a tense routine of watchfulness. The weekly meeting stopped. We communicated through the dead drop, a hollow log halfway between us, leaving terse, coded notes on bark. 2 crows north ridge meant 2 scout-sighted. Quiet soil meant all clear. The pressure was corrosive. Sleep was fitful. Every snap of a twig was an intruder. The joy we'd found in our harvest was buried under layers of fear. We were not living. We were enduring in a higher state of alarm. Maya's note one cold October morning was simple. Need to talk. Safe point. Noon. The safe point was a rocky overhang deep in a gully, invisible from any distance. I found her there, her face pale. I'm leaving the spring house, she said without preamble. It's too exposed on the ground. They're closing in. I can feel it. My heart dropped. Where will you go? She looked at me. The canopy. If you'll have me, not as a guest, as a resident. We consolidate. One location to defend. It's the only logic. She was right. The spring house, for all its stone walls, was a ground target. The canopy was a vertical fortress, but it was built for one, bringing her in permanently. It was the end of my old life, completely and finally. Yes, I said. The answer was easy. The logistics were not. We'll need to move everything. Slowly, secretly. The Great Migration took 2 weeks. Under cover of darkness and rain, we moved the vital content of the spring house. Her preserved food, her tools, her precious seeds, her reference books, into backpacks and ferried them to the tree. We camouflaged the spring house to look looted and abandoned. We left just enough to sell the story. Maya moved into the canopy. We rearranged the space, creating a private nook for her on the second level. It was cramped. It was intimate. It was a profound violation of the solitude I had both cherished and cursed. The sound of another person breathing, moving, living in my space was a constant, wonderful, and terrifying presence. The dynamic shifted again. We were no longer allies with separate bases. We were a household under siege. We established watch shifts day and night. We fortified the lower platforms with removable spike strips. We boiled a foul-smelling paste of rotten food and animal fat to pour on the trunks below, hoping the stench would mask our scent and deter climbers. The raiders found the abandoned spring housed a week later. We watched from the crow's nest as they ransacked it, taking the pitiful leftovers. They seemed frustrated. They knew they'd been outmaneuvered. Their searches in the woods grew more frantic, less careful. Then, on a frosty November morning, they found the base of my tree. It was the leader and one other. They stood at the clearing's edge, looking up, pointing. They'd seen the platforms, the cables, the gleam of a solar panel through the thinning leaves. The game was up. We were in the crow's nest, watching. Maya had her bow knocked. I had the rifle. We had agreed, no warning shots. If they tried to climb, if they showed hostile intent, we would defend. The morality of killing the living was a cliff we had already peered over. The leader approached the trunk. He examined the retractable ladder. Its bottom rung 12 feet up. He reached for a lower branch to start climbing. Maya looked at me. I nodded, my mouth a dry line. She drew, aimed, and let the arrow fly. It was not meant to kill. It was a message. The arrow thwacked into the pine trunk 6 inches from the leader's hand, vibrating with a menacing hum. He jerked back as if shocked, then looked up, his face a mass of fury and surprise. He couldn't see us in the shielded nest, but he knew. He shouted something to his companion, gesturing angrily at the tree. For a long moment, he stared up into the branches, his hand on his pistol. We held our breath, fingers on triggers. Then he spat on the ground, turned, and walked away, his companion following. They disappeared into the woods. Silence. Then the slow, shuddering release of our breath. "They'll be back," Maya whispered. "I know," I said, "but now they know we're Hornets." They never came back. Perhaps the arrow's precision spooked them. Perhaps the coming winter made a prolonged siege untenable. Perhaps they found easier prey. We didn't know. We maintained our vigilance as the first snow fell, but the woods remained still. Winter arrived, our second in this new world. But it was a different winter. I was not alone. The treehouse, once a monument to solitude, was now filled with the quiet sounds of shared life. The scratch of Maya's pencil as she logged seeds in her journal, the soft clink of 2 bowls at dinner, the murmured conversations in the dark. The cold was brutal, but we weathered it together. We shared warmth and watches. We played chess with carved wooden pieces. We talked about the before times, the people we lost, the fragile hope of a future. One night, during a storm, a heavy branch laden with ice broke off and crashed through one of our secondary platforms, tearing a cable. The structure shuddered. In the old days, I would have faced that terror and repair alone. This time, Maya was there. We waited for dawn, assessed the damage together, and worked as a team to fix it, passing tools, bracing against cold, her calm presence steadying my nerves. As we stood back, the temporary repair holding, she said, "We'll need to rebuild this come spring, design it stronger." I looked at her, at this fierce, smart, resilient person who had gone from a knot on a rock to the core of my world. The treehouse was no longer just my creation. It was ours. Its roots were in the trees, but its branches were the life we were building together in its boughs. The first year had passed. I had survived. But more than that, I had learned that survival alone is just a slower form of dying. True resilience, I now understood, isn't found in the strength of your walls or the height of your retreat. It's found in the trust you build with another person, in the shared watch in the dark, in the silent language of knots that becomes a spoken word, that becomes a life. The luxury was never in the cedar siding or the solar panels. The luxury, the profound, breathtaking luxury, was in no longer being alone. As the New Year's first sunrise painted the frozen canopy in gold and pink, I stood on the deck with Maya, looking out over the silent, sleeping, dangerous world. We were not safe. We would never be truly safe again. But we were rooted, and we were together. And for now, in our treehouse high above the fallen world, that was more than enough.